This meeting is being recorded.
Hello all, and welcome to Essence of Wonder. Today we're continuing with a second show in a series where we started with talking about election interference in general, and now we're looking to talk about the domestic aspects of it. We're going to bring back Bryson Bort, who helped us with moderating the previous panel pretty well, I would say. I like him, honestly, and I don't say that about too many people. He is one of the people I can actually talk to about cybersecurity and appreciate his responses. I go to him whenever I have some thought about strategy. And in general, I just honestly like him. Now, to be honest, I think that Bryson is, how would I describe? I'm looking for a way to describe without saying something like, "Ooh, he started the DEF CON ICS village" of something of the sort, right? Or he has this amazing company called Scythe. But oh yes, thank you, SJ. He's clean shaven as well. So with that, I think we can actually get started without further ado. Well, I guess I can mention he's also he was a captain in the U.S. military, and he's part of a lot of research groups surrounding that. But I'll just stop here and say, Bryson, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Gadi. I appreciate the introduction of being one of the boys band of cyber.
You're not no. No, but thank you. I appreciate you putting words into my mouth. I always appreciate that. I did, honestly, it was a shock for me because I saw you just before you took the beard off and just after. And I never saw you with the beard before that. So I had to reshuffle my entire take on who this guy called Bryson is a few times within a very short period. But back on topic. So we're going to talk about domestic interference. We're going to talk about elections. We're going to talk about what, Bryson?
Yeah, so for those of you who missed it, the last time we had a slightly different panel joining us, and we talked about the foreign influence on election security. Really, of course, came to the forefront here in the United States back in 2016. 2018, not as much of an issue, which we tackled the how and why. And 2020, we saw everything go to another level. And that's why I've been looking forward to discuss this panel, because it's so difficult to talk about yourselves. It's so difficult to have agency officials talk about what's happening here and what are we doing to shoot ourselves in the foot with ensuring that there is a free, fair, and transparent election each year.
Fair enough. Today we have a few people joining us, much of the previous panel. At this stage, of course, I would ask them to open their videos, unmute themselves, and I will, of course, ask Bryson to introduce them.
Yeah, so we are. I'm actually friends with all these folks too. It's funny how you get to play around with the people you work with. So Sarah Jane Terp, Matt Masterson, and Harri Hursti joining us to talk about domestic disinformation. If you don't know who they are, then you probably haven't been paying any attention at all to any of these topics, because they are all luminaries in their respective fields. Harri, I'd like to start with you because you are actually in the thick of this. Can you give us an update from the stairwell of wherever you are and what you're doing?
So I'm in Concord, New Hampshire, in National Guard base, and I'm here being appointed by Attorney General of New Hampshire, Secretary of State of New Hampshire, as one of the three auditors auditing a regional race from a town of Windham. What happened in November election was that there is a race where they have 8 candidates and you are asked to vote for 4. And one of the Democratic candidates, called Kirsty DeLaurel, she requested a recount. And when the recount was conducted, it was hand recount, all 4 Republican candidates gained almost exactly 300 votes more. 3 of the Democratic candidates, they gained about 25 to 30 more. And the person who asked for the recount got -99. In New Hampshire, when a recount is done, hand recount, it is customary that always voters gain some votes. And the reason is mainly because of voter errors. They are filling in the writing bubble and not writing anything. So the voting machine considers that to be overvote and don't count those votes. And of course, when the humans are looking the ballot, they see clear voter intent and they count the ballot. So it's normal that some votes are always added in the recount. Having -99 votes is never heard of. And of course, because of this, Republican candidates having 300 votes more, even when none of this changed any of the candidates being elected, it started a lot of national turmoil and speculation what has been causing this. New Hampshire passed a special law called Senate Bill 43, which authorized the audit we are doing right now. So I'm in the middle of an active audit, which is in another room. We are wrapping up this audit on the 27th, so the Thursday this week. But we had a breakthrough today, so we have now confirmation. We understand what is almost certainly the major contributor to this discrepancy.
I also appreciate that I get to feel like I'm on CNN by cutting to a live scene in action. So thank you for providing the update on what's happening there. We're going to cut over to Sarah Jane now, who is going to set the rest of the tone for the show with what is the definition of disinformation?
Oh, I get to the librarian today. So I'm going to define 4 things, not just disinformation, because it's set in the context. So rumors. So they're unverified information. You have no idea, they're just out there. Misinformation is where you start getting incorrect information. It's incorrect, it's misleading, it's misattributed. It's the typical image or video with the wrong labels on. And that's generally circulated without an agenda, but it's just false stuff hanging around. Disinformation. Now, one of the big differences is intent from the producer side. So this generally has a specific agenda behind it. It's often political, but not always. So that includes misinformation, but it can also include information that's actually true. So what's the falsehoods, the amplifications, things like artificially amplifying that information. And the manipulation isn't just in belief, but it's manipulation of belief, of senses of belonging, of trust in institutions, of emotions. You can use emotion a lot. You don't have to be false to do that. Conspiracy theories, last in the set of 4. So these are alternative explanations for events. They're basically another story. It's not always founded in reality, but it's related, but not quite the same. So basically, misinformation, false stuff, disinformation, false or true stuff with agenda, and rumors and conspiracy are the end of that. Enough?
That was good. That was great. I really liked framing the whole thing because as we know, it's not as simple as there's just one type. And all of those different types have different rationales behind them. So Matt, you were a Republican appointee to the Election Assistance Commission. You were the top election security official at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency under Chris Krebs, who, of course, was famously fired over Twitter last year by the president for holding the line on these very issues. What was going on last year, and what was happening inside at CISA that led to that?
Yeah, it's an awesome question, and it's super fun to be out now, right? Out of government and share some of these conversations with all of you and others. So within CISA, we already knew just from our work with the FBI, with the social media platforms, with the state and local election officials, that combating mis and disinformation, particularly foreign sources, which was our primary focus to start, was critically important. So we had built up relationships, channels, information sharing with the state and locals, the platforms, to be able to identify narratives and respond. And that kind of came to ahead or kind of prioritized when Iranian actors pushed misinformation out purporting to be from the Proud Boys at voters saying, we know how you're going to vote if you vote that way. You're going to have issues. And so that's where we started Rumor Control, which was a website to push out, not respond directly to any specific tweet or email or whatever, but to reassure voters with facts around the elections process, and more importantly, perhaps to empower state and local officials to take that information and build out their own information for their voters. And pretty quickly, it became apparent that whether we were talking about the activity from Iranian actors or domestic actors, that those facts were going to matter, that those narratives, countering those narratives with specific information at the federal level was going to be really important. And so the elections team that I worked with at CISA, working with Director Krebs and the state and local officials, worked really hard to identify narratives. And a really good example of a domestic narrative that came about quickly, that we responded to on Rumor Control, the state and local officials had to respond to quickly, was Sharpiegate. So for those that don't know, Sharpiegate came out of Arizona, and it actually, if we were to take SJ's well-said definitions, it started as misinformation. It was actually a voter who tweeted at the election office in Maricopa County and said, you handed me a Sharpie, I'm not confident my vote's going to count. And what do I do? And it kind of built from there locally and we saw this over and over again in this election until some super spreader accounts, whether blue check marks on Twitter or otherwise, amplified this and changed the narrative. So then the narrative on Sharpiegate changes from sort of a question and concern from a voter to a larger narrative of they were only handing Sharpies to Republican voters so they can cancel their votes, so that their votes wouldn't count. And specifically, some members of the Trump campaign were out there amplifying this concept that Republican voters were specifically given Sharpies so their votes wouldn't count. Completely untrue, completely disinformation and misinformation combining to spread rapidly. And so we put up a rumor about how all of this works generally, again, not addressing a specific tweet, but instead pushing a positive narrative around the fact that their votes would be counted, the fact that these writing implements are tested with the voting machines to make sure that they'll count accurately, and that folks could have confidence that their vote will be counted as cast. Arizona had already responded. Maricopa County had already responded. But what we saw is other states where this narrative was then being pushed across the board, even in states where Sharpies weren't being used and the voting machines that were being used in Maricopa weren't being used, these narratives sprung up. And so it empowered those officials in places like Nevada and North Carolina to take their own version of that rumor control and build it out and message to their voters. And you even saw press conferences held where, again, they had to say, we don't even use Sharpies out here. This isn't even an issue. But if we did, the votes would be counted as cast. So within CISA, our focus was really on doing the best we could, working with our partners to understand what those narratives were and to get out in front and respond to them as quickly as possible. And these bottom-up narratives, like with Sharpiegate, were prevalent. And then there were top-down ones that started with the major accounts and then spread broadly across social media in a variety of different ways. And it was oftentimes felt like we were just screaming into the abyss because the amplification is so much louder than anything that CISA could do, anything that a state or local election official could do. And so we had to focus on whatever channels we could to get that information out there.
Matt, I could tell you were out of government. You look a lot happier.
No comment. I'm more relaxed. I'll say that for sure.
Harri?
I would like to comment also that just before the election, like a month before election, I conducted research on that particular voting machine. And we simulated 40,000 different kinds of pen marks to see which marks it's reading best and which one is worst. Sharpie is the best pen for that machine. So irony is Sharpie really is the best one for that particular use and that particular machine.
Yeah, Harri's not to dwell on this one narrative, but he's exactly right. And the voting system test laboratories test all these implements, and the manufacturers do, and independent researchers like Harri do. It was completely false, but we saw this over and over again, right? The hammer and scorecard narrative of some sort of secret CIA vote changing software being deployed, completely false, completely untrue, just took hold, right? And it took all of us trying to respond to just get the factual information out there.
So, Harri, you've been on the ground at several sites around the country over the last half a year. What have you seen about how rumors, disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy are moving and shaping what's happening on the ground?
So I spent most of the last year in Georgia, from the primaries to the election day to senator races, and after that, now I'm here in New Hampshire. One thing which is really frustrating is how these same rumors and misinformation, same conspiracy theories, keep on going around, and also how they are systematically weaponized. There are certain bad actors who had been consolidating all the stories. Instead of having 10 different small narratives, now there are at least 3 people who have been systematically taking all the rumors, all the misinformation, all the conspiracy theories, and building a coherent single story, which includes all of those elements. Those deliberately constructed lies are extremely powerful, because now they are getting, people who are reading it have seen pieces of it, and it gives a more false but more coherent impact, and it's really hard to compete against this. And unfortunately, I meet a lot of people who are smart, who are well educated, who are in a positions of power, and simply it's impossible to try to explain that the narrative they believe to be true is completely false and made up. And not only false and made up, but actually something which cannot ever exist, because all the stories are combined from different systems. You're claiming features of completely different systems which cannot be existing at the same place, and telling a story based on that. Also, it's how the stories go around. We from Georgia. It started from Georgia. It's a story about adjudication software being used to manipulate the votes. And this story from Georgia then, for example, went to Antrim County, Michigan, claiming that was used there. The problem is that Michigan never bought adjudication software. That software doesn't even exist in the place. And Professor Alex Haldeman wrote a very good study and forensic report about what's happening in Antrim. But these stories are so hard to contradict with the facts, because the facts seems to be not always mattering.
Bryson, can I quickly give a specific example? And I didn't mean to jump in front of SJ, but Harri's exactly right. So I've been doing this since 2006, specifically around testing and certifying voting systems and election systems. Many of the narratives that we saw in this election domestically, I have seen in existence since 2005, 2006. And a good example is the one, what some have dubbed the dead dictator conspiracy theory about Venezuela. So that dates back to 2005, 2006, and a voting machine company that's no longer in business. Their systems are no longer in use. And it actually, the conspiracy around, shipping votes off or the rigging of the system through that actually existed in small pockets on the left, not on the right. And then to see it reemerge and combined with other ones, including, ones around Citel and servers in Spain and things like that have been around for at least a decade that I've seen, all combined into these large narratives where Harri's right, where you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole trying to smack them down, because they're combining not just narratives, but they're combining systems and vendors in a way that isn't at all how it works, isn't at all how the systems are deployed, owned. I mean, those of us that have worked in this, like Harri and I know, the history of these vendors and how this goes down, and none of this is correct. But that combination of narratives makes it almost impossible to unwind the twine or the threads to be able to bat it down, which is intentional, right? That's not by accident. That's intentional, so that each time you think you smack one away, another version of it comes back in a different way, more complex and harder to smack down, so that they can keep them going, so that they can keep the lies going in order to undermine confidence and get to the mission that they have. It's been stunning to me to see narratives that I've been dealing with, that I know Harri's been dealing with for over a decade, kind of reemerge in this combined knotted threads to try to smack down. It's pretty crazy.
Matt is absolutely right, and it's kind of funny how exactly these stories are following, because some of the biggest false narratives which are going around today referring to certain company. The previous time when this was going around was 2004, 2005, when instead of company, it was name of two brothers instead of the company. Everything else is one-to-one same, except replace the two brothers with a company.
So Matt's mentioned Iran, Venezuela, and Spain, SJ. How do we see these events and facts and get relaundered into domestic issues?
Oh, I mean, everything gets relaundered at some point. So I'm working at country level now. So I'm looking at multiple sets of countries and not just US, which is kind of nice because the US is still batshit crazy. Sorry. Anyway, did I say that out loud? Okay, onwards. So I am watching on things like COVID, the same narratives get reused all over the world, whether they're being picked up and reused by domestic actors, which happens, or being pushed by aggressor countries and just reused because, hey, this is a cool thing to have. But that's not new either. I mean, that was done, I said 2017. I sat with a Canadian friend watching US-based narratives being picked up and used straight in Canada. Literally, it didn't even bother rebranding or taking the eagles off. So it's as much a matter of watching everything now. We're seeing learnings. Let me have a look at my lists of who's been learning what from each other. We're seeing America First type movements turning up in different bits of the world. You're seeing narratives that have been used in a lot of other countries. I mean, some places have had misinformation for decades going on. And it's kind of like, that's a cool thing, we use it. And one of the things that I'm trying to push the industry to do now is to not focus on the narrative so much. You're going to play whack-a-mole. There are some things you can do, which is to build good, strong counter-narratives. So the sort of stuff the reality team does. Use segmentation, put counter-narratives that are tailored into spaces where disinformation is. Got lots to say about information voids later. But it's also about moving on to where the risk is. So it's not just that there is misinformation out there or disinformation out there, but there is so much of it, it's almost background now. So you have to focus on how bad is it, how likely is it, what are the bad things, who are they to, when are they, and start managing that instead. And I know I'm talking a lot, but soapbox. I'd like to talk later about how you do risk assessments for countries, how you do risk management for countries when this is just endemic.
Bryson, can I build on one thing that SJ just said that I think from my experience, not just within CISA, but also at Stanford now, working on both election disinformation, misinformation, but then vaccine mis and disinfo. And it's exactly the narrative part's important. But in the election, we actually anticipated fairly well what many of the narratives were going to be. I didn't anticipate that the CIA, hammer and scorecard one, but anticipated things around election night reporting, certainly anticipated things around mail ballot processing and this concept of vote dumping, right? Because we know how election officials process ballots, and that, as they process, they're going to dump data throughout the course of the evening. So election officials, CISA, the platforms all had a pretty good feel for what the narratives were going to be. The same goes on the vaccine side. We all had a pretty good feel. The experts that have been working on this for a while certainly knew what the narratives are going to be. The challenge here is what SJ said. It's the massive amount of disinfo. It's the volume that it's coming at you. So the election officials got out in front. They talked about, hey, look, counting votes is going to look different this year. It's going to take us longer. We'll keep you. And they were pushing information out, but their voice is so much less amplified than the conspiracies, the lies, the mis and disinformation, that one of the really interesting things that I know academia is starting to look at now in these contexts is how to measure the effectiveness of that that pre-messaging and what the impact was. We know election officials were doing it. We've talked to some that have done some measurement where it's shown what I call the persuadable folks. So you've got the folks that aren't going to believe anything that the election officials are saying, but then you've got a big group of people that kind of took in that information, went okay, and went about their lives, right, and kind of just moved on. And we need to really understand that to get to the other side of this coin, which I think SJ is referring to with some of the risk assessment and others, which is we talk a lot about the supply side, right? If we think about the supply and demand, playing whack-a-mole on the supply side, where's the dis and misinfo coming from? How do we respond? How do we push information out? How do the social media companies take action against that? All really important things. What are we doing on the demand side? How are we talking, in this case, to Americans so that they're not demanding to receive this information? Because it in part comes because there's a desire to receive it, right? They're saying, this isn't the narrative I want this narrative that tells me the election is rigged or the vaccine isn't safe. And what conversations, and I know this is something that the government's talking about, that academics have been looking into for years. This is not new, but digging into what's in the psyche of people to want to receive this information, to reconfirm the narratives that they have, and how do we kind of break through over the long term to cut down on the demand side, because it's whack-a-mole on the supply side.
Go for it, Harri.
99.99% of all the election officials are hardworking, honest, try to anything, they go extra mile, and then they go another extra mile because they care about elections. They want to secure elections. And one of the biggest narratives, false narratives for this November election, actually it came from a video an election official from a tiny county made, and she published that, and it took legs and it goes around, and it just shows how then when you have a single person who wants to undermine her own profession and her own colleagues, how powerful that undermining is. And I don't know, I have no idea what was her motivation to do that video, but we are going to be hearing from that. The echoes of that story she made is going to go around another 4 years.
So we mentioned that there are folks that just cannot be persuaded by the formal establishment. I think that's one of the things that has shifted, is that there is a lot more access to a lot more information, and you no longer have to get it from a centralized organization. What do we do about these folks that are in the effectively unpersuadable by traditional means category?
They're not necessarily unpersuadable. What you're focusing on the moment is persuasion to truth. It's persuasion to worldview, where for a lot of them, it's not about what they think is real or not. It's about who they think they belong to. So these are belonging signals, not necessarily truth signals. So you've got to kind of, again, with the risk, you've got to look and see where is the actual issue here, and try to address that rather than the one you'd like to have. I would love just to be able to get truth out there and, hey, you're done. But there's a lot of work to do on things like community trust.
So can you expound on that? You talked about belonging. You just started to talk about trust. What are the different components that are in the social makeup to where somebody's believing something?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about identities. So we have, this is about narratives and stories, but we have narratives about who we are. So who am I? About who I do and don't belong to. So in-group, out-group. I've talked about this a lot already, but yeah, hell, let's do it again. And narratives about what's happening in the world. And sometimes we confuse trying to fix people's world narratives when it's actually their in-group, out-group narratives. So are they part of this larger thing? Where are the sticky points there? How do you reach into those communities? How do you not just build belief, but trust? Trust is huge. And this is why I say it's so refreshing not to be working in the US for a bit, because it has an enormous trust problem. It's like half the country doesn't trust the other and vice versa. And that bridge building, as much as that dealing with the disinformation, would seem to be the thing that needs to start. And there've been some interesting stuff from people like the Commons Project, who pick people on either side of an ideological divide and start, you have the conversation about cars and then slowly build into the conflicting viewpoints. Start getting people just to connect. And yeah, I mean, it's hard for me reading a lot of this stuff. I mean, I gotta go crawling through, and it's really hard to tell what people actually believe and what they're signaling. Now, I think we need to think about that.
Harri?
I think one elephant in the room, which has not been discussed in public sufficiently, is how the movement, if you make, with the disinformation, misinformation right now, has turned to massive profiteering machine. Keeping these stories, making people angry is a way to open their wallets. And this is, I'm disgusted personally about the actors who are fanning the anger with the only real reason behind is just getting donations, raising money for themselves. And they don't care what is the damage it's doing to the country, what is the damage it's doing to our society. It's all about their personal profiteering.
Yeah, Bryson, we see that plainly in Arizona with the audit, right? You see just massive fundraising around this fake exercise in Arizona, where they're using the anger about the election, that the hope, the emotion of hope that somehow this is going to uncover something and lead to an overturning of the election, which isn't going to happen. Even the senators that have sponsored it said that's not the goal here. But man, they've raised a lot of money, and those involved have raised a lot of money off of it. And in the end, Harri's exactly right. For a lot of this, it's about raising money, raising capital, profiteering off of the anxiety, emotion, anger that folks are feeling by driving these narratives, and with no regard at all for the incredible harm that's being done, whether to our elections or our health and safety in general.
Coincidentally, I just had Lester Godsey, who is the CISO for Maricopa County, on my RSA panel just a few days ago on election security. SJ?
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, breaking the money flows. I got so tired last year of every time we dug into something, we found someone making money. It's like you've got the ones that have been there for a long time, like the Natural News Network making money off people worried about health. I know the anti-vaxxers, the people selling books, T-shirts, but some of these money flows are pretty obscene. I mean, we've worked on things like ad tech. So who is making advertising money, online advertising money off basically no hate, disgust, whichever emotions they can use. And it's looking at what those chains are. But there's also that trying to guard on this system. So it's not just an information system you're trying to keep healthy, but you're also trying to keep the political system where somebody can have a topic and raise money on that topic without the wrath of God falling on their heads. It's difficult to pick it apart, I think is, again, with all the systems, again, with all the risks, but picking apart the political system, the information system, the disinformation, so basically the threat system, the risk system, and the response systems to it. I think I'm saying it's difficult. There are many different things you can try, but America is almost like the strongest test case for, you've got all this stuff. Let's try all the things that might work.
Since the topic of Arizona has now come up, can somebody please summarize what has been happening in Arizona? Who wants it? Matt?
Yeah, I'll do it briefly, and then I'm sure although Harri's so immersed in New Hampshire, I don't even know if he knows. So Arizona, essentially, some Republican state senators in Arizona called for an audit of the Maricopa, which is Phoenix, their election. Keep in mind, Maricopa County's done 3 of their own audits. They've also done additional reviews and testing on systems both before and after the election with no indication of systemic issues, certified the election. And this includes Republican supervisors certifying the election and the Republican Arizona governor saying, that the election was correct, right? So despite all that, despite all the information and evidence, they have paper ballots out there that they've looked at, that they've reviewed. Certainly we can discuss, improving processes across the country, but there could be no question that Maricopa County's done due diligence around this election sort of repeatedly. And yet these senators called for an audit, brought in a firm that's position on the election and the stealing of the election was already clear when they brought them in. So I hardly call it an independent auditor. And they've got access to the millions of ballots that Maricopa County has, as well as the voting systems. And there's no clear policies, procedures, processes around this audit. They just took the ballots into a coliseum. They're spinning them around on tables. There's no, as an election official, none of the practices that we have as far as transparency, bipartisanship, even just controls, ballot custody controls have been maintained. So for instance, at the start of the audit, they were allowing the people conducting the count, which are just volunteers, to bring pens in with the ballots. So immediately now questions are raised. What did they do with the ballots with these pens? It may be nothing, it may be something, but you can't prove it at this point, right? You've allowed access to people with pens, to live ballots, real ballots. And so at that point now we're left in a position where we don't know what they've done. And this same theme continues. They don't have chain of custody. You don't know who's had access to the ballots when, how many of the ballots. Currently, there's a pause on the audit in Arizona because they had to do graduations in the facility that they're conducting the audit. So the auditors boxed up the ballots and put them out in a fenced in, not up to election standards, insecure facility next to a public restroom. And they're just sitting there until they can bring them back and count them. So, none of the things that we as election officials would put in place to have controls, to have confidence, transparency, media access wasn't there until basically the media beat down the door and demanded it. And so they're in the middle of it. They've counted by, depending on who you ask, between 25%, 40% of the ballots. So they've got several weeks probably to go. And then with the voting machines, they took the voting machines and drug them back into a back room where Maricopa County, nor the Secretary of State, nor the media had access to whatever they were doing with those machines. So just on Friday, the Secretary of State of Arizona told Maricopa County essentially the chain of custody has been broken on these machines. These are critical systems. You can't take them back and use it. So Maricopa County's in a position where they're going to have to, in all likelihood, find or acquire new voting systems because of this. It's been, in my estimation, a complete clown show. All it's done is driven narratives, undermine trust, and raise money for those who want to raise money off of it. It's done nothing to validate and reconfirm or confirm the accuracy of the election. And in the end, you can't trust the results that are going to come out of it at the end anyway, because they haven't followed any of the controls, policies, and procedures that you'd expect from an auditor.
Harri, anything you have to add?
Well, since I'm in the middle of active audit, I want to underline one thing, that audits shouldn't be done in secret. Audits should be always about open, well-documented processes which can be observed. So the observers, whether they are in person or over the video links, they have to know beforehand what is going to happen, so that they have a reference what they're observing. Everything should be documented, everything should be communicated. And audits have a deadline. So, when you're doing election audit, you have a deadline when you have to complete it. There is no such thing as open-ended audit. We have a 5-phase audit, which we are doing here. We are today completing phase 3 of 5. We ran over in the first phase by 3 hours from estimated time. In a second phase, we ended about 7 hours short of estimated times. And today we are going to be right on the money. We are probably going to be running over 2 hours over time, for the reason being that we had a documentation mix-up. But everything should be in an hours, not in a days. It shouldn't be like you are running over time by week or by days. You should know what you're doing and you should be documenting. And I would also want to point out that Baker-Carter Commission is one of the leading watchdogs of the United States people who are sending observers to both elections and audits across the world. And they have a minimum requirement about documentation and processes. And if those minimum requirements are not met, they are not sending observers because they don't want to be legitimizing something which is unobservable. I think everyone in the United States in elections should hold ourselves responsible to the same level of standards in the US, what we are demanding other countries to do.
Mm-hmm.
SJ, do you think that what's going on in Arizona might not be about disinformation?
Well, I said in the chat, I mean, it sounds like a hybrid attack to me. It's just like a classic, you physically create uncertainty, you have no idea what's going on, and you throw disinformation into that. And you have just massively reduced trust in all directions. Not pretty.
To build on SJ's point, I mean, at one point, the Arizona audit account, who they can't even say who is running the account at times. It's just a Twitter feed. Alleged deletion of materials by the county based on their audit, and it turns out they had to walk that back because, in fact, they just hadn't grabbed the data appropriately, and the county had actually provided the information. And so, to SJ's point, it's hybrid. It's sort of the ongoing confusion and ramping up of emotions around what's happening there, along with sort of strategic releases of information that even if they walk it back later, which they had to do in under questioning from the media and others, that bell's already rung. They've already pushed that information out there, and you could see it spread. You could see it fuel, deletion of databases, and this is what we've been looking for. And literally, at one point, one of the election officials in Maricopa County said, no, the database isn't deleted. I'm literally online looking at it right now. It's up, and any Arizona voter could go look. But that damage was already done. It was already pushed out there. That narrative already existed. It started to spread to other places. And at that point, it doesn't matter if they walk it back in any way, shape, or form, because that they've already done what they wanted to do with that hybrid push.
I would like to point out that the claim of deleted data is going around. I just literally a week ago heard that there's a massive rumor how the ballots, which should be preserved by federal law for 22 months, have been destroyed in Massachusetts. And it took me basically 2 hours to figure out that the person who is spreading this lie knows it's a lie, and has developed a weird theory how a data which doesn't exist has been destroyed, and that data has replaced the paper ballot, which is the legal document. So it's complete. Once you have a narrative saying that database was deleted or data was deleted, all of a sudden the same narrative jumps up in completely unrelated places because it's powerful, and you hear, oh, they had deleted data. Oh, they have deleted data too. And all of that is just nonsense. And by the way, I want to point one thing about the difference here in New Hampshire. We did have two different results. So we knew that in one race, we have two different results. And our job was to find out why it happened, how it happened, and how to prevent it ever happening again. And at the same time, also checking that this one race where we had a known two results, that there was no hidden problem in other races which were not audited. So we at least had a undeniably two different numbers. We have to find out which one is true or something in between and what happened.
Bryson, can I just share that just because it's kind of funny, even though it's not funny what's happening in Arizona. So to Harri's point about these narratives, there was a narrative that emerged this week in Arizona, kind of, out on social media and other places so there's a chicken farmer who is a politician in Phoenix that's involved in the elections process, and his family, it's not even him, his family's chicken farm burnt down. And there were conspiracies being bannered, and I'm not kidding, bannered about that this is how they're going to destroy the ballots, the evidence, feed them to the chickens, and then incinerate the chicken farm in order. And I'm not kidding. Like this is a narrative that came about, and this is completely true. The auditors in Arizona, part of what they're doing is taking high resolution scans and pictures of the ballots, looking for bamboo present in some of the ballots, because that'll prove clearly that ballots were coming in from China or Korea or somewhere else, which is so ludicrous for so many reasons, but it's something that they're out there looking for because they've convinced themselves that this is how we're going to find that smoking gun, is bamboo on ballots. And you're just like, what's next, man? Like, it's so absurd. You can't even make it up anymore.
Yes, you can. Somebody is having a great deal of fun making it up anymore. I mean, it's just somebody somewhere thinking, hey, well, yeah, but let's try this one. Part of this is conspiracy theory thing of, just these alternate realities and these alternate explanations. But it's, again, whether it's the belonging thing or not, but it's sticking, which is deeply troublesome. Where are your cynics?
I think one part of one source of domestic confusion is also that it seems to be that a large population in the United States don't know that every state have their own state laws about how elections are done. And there are states where the local jurisdictions, whether they are townships or wards or counties, have their own regulation. So there is a massive misunderstanding that because election is done in my state this way, that would be the same everywhere else. Absolutely not true. And again, that's one source, an innocent source of confusion, which of course this innocent source is spanned out of the proportions, and claims are made to disproportionately make these differences and confusion to sound malicious. And we have really, I mean, in my opinion, the US the threat model of elections have never been sufficiently taken into account that your system has to be able to defend its reputation, its results against false claims of foul play. Elections are not about who wins. Elections are about who is supporting losing ideas, because the promise of democracy is peaceful transition of power. And the peaceful transition power, the winners are always going to accept the results. The peaceful transition of power is
not always, Harri. 2016, even though he won, he didn't. He said, but there were still rampant problems, right? Not always.
I don't know. I think he had that narrative preloaded and just carried on the script for a bit. Sorry. Say that out loud again.
The whole thing here is that it is about transparency and evidence-based elections, where you can provide evidence so that the supporters of something which didn't pass, something which didn't win, are having the evidence to understand and trust, have a full confidence that the election was fair and square. And that's really what US elections haven't been needing to address in the level it's needing to be addressed right now. How you prove that election was honest when it claims are most likely, and most of them are false claims.
Harri is so right. So the kind of mantra in the elections community for years, and in part driven by folks who have demanded more transparency, better auditing, and correctly, has been, you need to convince the loser they lost. That's not the threat. And we saw it in that's no longer wasn't, and we sort of naively believed it was, the sort of threat environment. The actual operating environment is one in which you need to assume the loser not only won't accept they lost, but will push narratives to say that they didn't lose, right? As we've seen, and you need to offer the evidence, the information, the communication to convince your voters, your public, of the correctness of the election, and that evidence I think we need to continue to build out. The problem is, as anyone that's worked in at least U.S. elections can say, these counties are completely insufficiently resourced, completely insufficiently supported from an IT standpoint, and so we're asking them to adapt to an operating environment that, one, they didn't create themselves, that they've been chucked into even further, and that they haven't been sufficiently resource supported or any of that. And so we're setting them up for failure if we don't recognize that now and increase the level. And I don't just mean money, I mean expertise. We have to work in this new operating environment and really assess what our risks are, which I think Harri's done an amazing job on the technical side. I'd be interested in SJ's view of the risk environment on the disinfo, misinfo side, right?
Oh man, I do risk assessments and I look at those three large pieces. What is this information environment? So how are people posting information? But also, how are they seeking information? How are they looking for information? So this comes, not me, this is like a UNDP thing, which was really cool. And how are they sharing it? And these aren't the same things. And those information environments aren't the same as the disinformation environment. So you might have completely different transmission routes. You might have completely different channels for disinformation. So then you have to look at what's your threat environment? What's your risk environment? So, who is out there? What are they doing? What are the bad things likely to happen? What are the routes they're taking through? So, how is disinformation getting to people? What are the consumptions? So, how much of this is getting taken up? So, measurement becomes incredibly important. And I know we had a note somewhere saying, what if people ask what they can do as InfoSec people? And I would say right now, start thinking about how you measure the effects of both disinformation and responses to disinformation. And yeah, that's hard, but someone's got to do it. So it's about concentrating on the likely bad stuff. It's concentrating on the measures that actually make a difference. So things that make a difference, things you can do before disinformation hits. So there's a lot of mitigation work you can do. Both with the people on the receiving end, the communities of trust. You can do work on the information landscape. So looking for the gaps where people are looking for information and those get filled in with disinformation, those information voids. Dealing with those, building a trust relationship. So if your county, your state level, building a place where people will come for information, because hell if I can find it half the time. So yeah, it's a lot of gardening.
So information, good or bad, requires a platform. And that platform is social media here. How much is social media a part of this problem? I'm going to start with Harri.
Social media in its current form and the way how automated amplifiers are used to broadcast and boost messages selectively, that is really a big part of this mess. The other part is Twitter is kind of becoming a dinosaur petting zoo, because Twitter messages are text, and we see a race of memes, which are triggering emotional response before you know what the message is going to be. Your brain is already generating an emotional response before you know what you're looking. And that also means that even people who are very well equipped and have a kind of rudimentary human firewall behind their eyes are still subject to have that emotional reaction. So we are only in the beginning of weaponization of social media in misinformation warfare, information warfare, and influence operations.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Oh God, yeah. Sorry, I bet Matt wants to as well. I mean, we're talking about, again, the information landscape. So social media is part of that, but it's not the only place people get news. There are all of these loops going on, like radio. I mean, a lot of places, out in the sticks, you basically, depending on TV, radio, maybe a local newspaper to get information, and that interacts back with social media. That interacts back with sites. So social media is a large part in that it's used as amplification. It's used as micro-targeting to populations and people. And there are things like better privacy regulations, putting friction in the system, stuff you could start doing now, which would help. But it's not the only part. Says Matt.
Yeah, I agree. I won't dwell on it because I know we only got a few minutes, but I mean, look, the platforms, obviously recognize at least their role, working with them closely in the election. There's good people there trying really hard to combat this, and there were some positive developments. But we still saw. I mean, if you go look at the Election Integrity Project's report on this, we saw one, cross-platform spreading. So we tend to focus on the silos of each platform, but the ability to take a post from Twitter or YouTube video and take screenshots and then post it on Instagram or share it somewhere else. This is a complex problem, and each platform can take their own responsibility, but it gets super complicated as you look at the narrative spreading across the platforms. And then again, one of the things we saw was that really the narratives were driven, amplified by only, a handful of people. We're not talking about thousands. They were really these super spreaders that drove this. And so consistent enforcement of policies on these super spreaders and being transparent and public about how they do that, I think is critically important. But SJ is exactly right. It's not just about them. There's so many other, and one of the primary ways we receive information from each other is within our own communities that we exist, right? Our groups that we feel accepted and trusted in. And that's where I really do, not to beat the dead drum or the drum on this again, but the dealing with the demand side. Why are people seeking this out? Why does it make them feel part of a community or a group? And how do we begin to deal with that demand side? I think is going to be really critically important because, again, we're playing a lot of whack-a-mole over on the supply side. But if we can get at the demand side and what it is that is driving, and we have research, right? There's good folks like SJ, that folks like Clint Watts that have looked at sort of the impact of this and really the radicalization of people because they feel part of a community. This is going to be critically important as we move forward.
Okay, Matt, I'm actually going to go back to you for the last question before we go into the lightning round to close it out. So all of this being said, and you're now out and this is behind you, what do you wish that your organization had done differently last year?
Yeah, I love this question because it's the right question to ask and it breaks my heart. So to put it in context, the work that went into securing this election was immense. It was successful, right? We had an election that was secure, that was accurate, that in the midst of a pandemic, election officials stepped up and served their voters in a way that led to, record voter turnout. And yet, January 6th still happened. The Arizona audit is still happening and this narrative is still going on. And so I sit there and go, despite all of our good work at the federal level, trying to support state and locals, the state and locals' incredible work, I have to live with the reality that January 6th still happened and what we could have done. And so for me, I wish we would have been more aggressive earlier on, dating back to even 2018, on what we could have done on, again, the resilience measures to engage the American public to disinfo, what steps we could have taken to get out in front way in advance and talk to folks about what was coming. Because in the end, despite all the good work, all the incredible work around this election, the narrative still took hold. People still believed it to the point where they were willing to storm their own Capitol. Right. And it eats me alive to think about the opportunities I wish we could have taken. And I know why, including First Amendment concerns, which are very real and legitimate from the government side. But man, this is why I'm still doing this work, because I live with the fact that I wish I would have done more on that side.
All right. Lightning round. Harri, you're up first. Is this a one-party issue? Yes, no, and one sentence to add to it.
So if we look historically, both parties at certain point of time has been more on the topic. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be everybody's issue, and everybody should be caring about this. Right now, it's one party, but if we look back, what happened in 2004, that was the other party, which was at the time not in this extent, but was up in arms. So we are all in this together, and it's not only us as United States. We already see this movement to get hold in certain European countries. We have that is scary. This is a thought is a contagious mind virus, and this is really the mind virus is right now making its rounds.
All right, clarifying the rules of the lightning round again. Yes, no, and one sentence. Sarah J, is this a one-party issue?
It's not even a one country issue. No.
Oh, I like that. I like that answer. That was fantastic. Matt?
No, and if we don't start paying attention on both sides of it, we're going to see it emerge on the other side, and then we're going to have 50+% of people on both sides distrusting our elections.
All right, going to give you one more chance. Last lightning round question. Should social media be treated as critical infrastructure?
Oh, you're looking at me.
I said Harri.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
In a sense, yes.
I'm looking at all of you. I'm just staring at my camera.
Yeah.
Harri.
Yes, it is already.
Sarah J.
Yes and no. So yes, it's critical infrastructure, but the way the internet moves, shapes, maybe not forever.
Matt?
No, but that doesn't mean it's not critically important. It just doesn't fit that definition as we think about it.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us as we cover to close out our series talking about the domestic side. Gadi?
Thank you all. You're amazing. And then at the end, you come in and throw some bombs. So I guess I'll share a short perspective of sorts. Back in 2007, I was in Estonia for the quote-unquote, I can actually do it with the video, first internet war. And we were there and we helped out. And then I kind of wrote the postmortem analysis. And one of the conclusions, everything was boring, it was usual. But one of the conclusions was critical infrastructure isn't what we're defining it. Meaning, does it matter if a router goes down, taking down a portion of the internet, or an ISP, or if thousands of the users attack it and bring it offline effectively? And that made me think, okay, so I can expand critical infrastructure to the civilian sector, I can expand it to services, but can I expand it to users, to home computers, to bots? And I couldn't fathom that. What I understood was that we're looking at critical infrastructure as something we can control to a degree, whether we are kidding ourselves or not. Where critical infrastructure can be, again, from this side as opposed to on the definition side, something we can influence. And in Estonia, for example, they have gone and created TV shows around patching. And I was there at the hotel at night a couple of years ago, and I wanted to open my minibar because I was really hungry. So I went downstairs, and the person at reception told me, "Sorry, I can't. We're just updating your computer now. Can you come back in 40 minutes?" That level of awareness is something I've never seen anywhere. Back when all the wireless networks were open, they were encrypted. And as I think about it, asking a question, is Twitter critical infrastructure, is mind-boggling, and we can't begin to answer that until we understand how we work together with civilian space as opposed to defining it as something we control, which is where we're kind of looking at, or how we can get more control over things. Whether you look at the DHS's definitions or at the UK definition, critical infrastructure is far more than just what we can affect, but rather what can affect us. And that's just some thinking because of the last question. Which is a short story by Asimov, by the way, but doesn't matter. Science fiction geek here. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. If you can stay with us for a bit afterwards so we can tell you how amazing you are, that will be amazing. Thank you, Carl, for organizing this show. And I have a lot to think about. And that's a wrap.
The recording has stopped.
All right, yay team.
Yay.
We have 2 more attendees still in. 1 and I'm going to kick